Hello, my name is Dr. Cynthia McKenzie, and I work for Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and I'm based in St. John's, Newfoundland. I'm the lead author on a review that we conducted looking at the harmful algae and phycotoxins in Canada, and so I wanted to share some of that information with you today. This is a map that shows the overall Global HAB Status Report. I'm indicating within it the location of the study that we conducted in Canada. I want to point out that in the circle, we're referring to the harmful algae database information that we have on the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts. And although we don't have any information on harmful algae events and toxins in the Arctic, we do have some information, and I will share that later. But right now, I want to indicate in the map that this is the areas that we have HADAT information for in OBIS regions 1 and 4, 1 being the eastern coast and 4 being the Pacific coast. I'd also like to mention that I have several colleagues throughout Canada who have worked on this with me as well. And so I'll speak a little bit more about that now. The title of our paper is 3 Decades of Canadian Marine Harmful Algae Events, Phycotoxins, and Phytoplankton and Phytotoxins of Concern to Human and Ecosystem Health. The majority of the authors do in fact work for Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and in fact are emeritus researchers who came back from retirement in some cases to help us put this together, as they were involved in a lot of these events and knew more information about it than we did. In addition, we have worked with colleagues at Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which does the toxin monitoring for human health for phycotoxins, the National Research Council, as well as the Canadian Museum of Natural History, and the University of Quebec in Rimouski, and an industry-led aquaculture harmful algae monitoring program on the Pacific coast. So we've had quite a few people with this. I should mention that in 2018, we got together in Nova Scotia to review this data and to review what we knew about it and to make sure that it was quality controlled so we could put this all together. So we've been working on this for some time now, and it basically covers quite a bit of information. This is a map to give you an idea of the area covered. Panel A would be BC and the Pacific coast, British Columbia and the Pacific coast. Panel B, the Atlantic Canada, which includes Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Quebec. One of the things we did for our review was to compile a list of harmful algae species. We have 2 tables for this. The first table has to do with phycotoxins of concern, and it lists the species that have been found in Canada and whether they've been associated with an event or not, and what region of Canada they've been found in. This also includes the Arctic and information about whether it was being found in sea ice as well. We've summarized our HADAT data based on the event type. We've had basically 4 different event types in Canada, having to do with amnesiatic shellfish toxin, or AST, diuretic shellfish toxin, DST, or paralytic shellfish toxin, PST, and other activities as in marine mortalities and that sort of thing. And you can see from this that the majority in Canada, the reports in Canada have to do with paralytic shellfish toxins. However, in the Pacific and the final panel, panel C, it does have quite a bit on fish mortalities, which happen to do with the aquaculture industry on that coast. The first phycotoxin I wish to speak about would be amnesiatic shellfish toxin. It was first detected in Newfoundland, in PEI in 1987, where following some fatalities from people eating shellfish. It was determined that it was a Pseudonychia multiceres species that was found containing domoic acid. And since that event, which was in the first panel here, in PEI, the first set of panels and all these following figures, the first decade is the first set of panels, the second decade will be the next set, the third decade, and then finally on the fourth set of panels would be the cumulative view of where we found things. So the harmful algae events that are related to AST, as I said, started in PEI, but since that time have been found through many locations in Atlantic Canada and also in Pacific Canada. By the time you get to the cumulative view, you see that most areas have had some AST events. The next group I wish to talk to you about is paralytic shellfish toxins. This, as I mentioned, is the broadest and most common event in Canada. We have recurring events in particular in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, in the estuary around the Gulf of St. Lawrence, as well as the Bay of Fundy. This is due, in fact, to the location of cysts. Here we have a cyst of Alexandrium catenata. And so we have cyst beds, one of the largest cyst beds in the world in the Bay of Fundy, which causes reoccurring cysts. There was an event in 2008 in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, in the estuary of St. Lawrence, that was caused by paralytic shellfish toxin, which had a mass mortality of multi-species. This I've noted here, paper by Michelle Starr et al. 2017, that talks about this event. And it was quite a large event that had, as I said, multi-species involved. But you can see that it's quite throughout the area. Diuretic shellfish toxin, also a concern, also first found in the Atlantic area in Nova Scotia. It's been found in several locations since. This was not really detected in the Pacific until later years, as you can see in the third panel here. It's usually the vegetative state, the pelagic state, but also in the Magdalen Islands and in Newfoundland, they were actually Procentrum lima, which also produces DST, was found growing on, which is a benthic species, was found actually growing on the mussel lines. And finally, marine mortalities. As I mentioned, the majority of the marine mortalities have occurred on the Pacific coast, having to do with aquaculture sites. Although it is not necessarily the same species each year, it varies. There are several different species that cause this, but at least usually some species does have, as occurs in enough event to create mortalities for finfish aquaculture. This is a summary map for the Atlantic, which shows that once you include the phycotoxins that I mentioned previously, which are regulated in Canada, and then you add emerging toxins to them, you'll find that in many areas you're finding the potential for additional harmful algae events, and that may affect the ecosystem or ecosystem function, or fisheries or aquaculture. This is from a document that we're preparing that's in review now in response to science advice request, basically summarizing the Atlantic harmful algae and toxin data. We have a similar one for the Pacific, again showing not only the regulated phycotoxins, but also the emerging phycotoxins. So again, throughout the coast of the Pacific, there are potential for quite a bit of issues. I mentioned we're going to talk a little bit about the Arctic. Although no actual devoted research has been done for detecting harmful algae in the Arctic, or no monitoring for toxins in the Arctic, we do have information from our colleagues who have been studying phytoplankton and sea ice in the Arctic, Canadian Arctic, And so the first panel shows the species, Pseudonychia species that produce phycotoxins for AST. Panel B is Alexandrium species, that locations in the Arctic which can produce PST. And finally, in the third panel, you have the species, Dinophysis and various others, that create or produce DST. And so we were somewhat surprised, I think, to find that there were so many species doing so well in the Arctic. Although this time we don't really know what kind of production of phycotoxins they are carrying out, or if they are at all. But we are particularly concerned about accumulations of toxins in the Arctic at the cold temperatures. So this is something they were particularly concerned about. So in summary, we did a review of 593 Canadian habitat records from 1987 to 2017, together with other data and publications. What we've shown is that there's a recurring harmful algae events have been widespread throughout both the Atlantic and the Pacific regions. We have found 70 pelagic and sea ice associated species, algal species reported in Canada that are known to be harmful to the humans or ecosystem health. 45 of these are also reported in the Arctic. PST, AST, and DST are the phycotoxins of most concern in Canada and are monitored by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to protect human health. However, there's an increasing concern on how these phycotoxins and their accumulations in the food web may impact ecosystem health, and particularly in the Arctic region. Marine species mortalities occurs on both coasts of Canada. However, particularly in the Pacific coast, where finfish aquaculture sites are most common, and they do occur annually, but not necessarily the same causative species each year. And finally, monitoring and ocean observation systems can provide information for early detection and early warning to mitigate the effects of harmful algae on aquaculture and fisheries. As I mentioned previously, this review was part of a larger study in Canada. And so we've been asked for advice on harmful algae events and their status, the impact and consequences, and what the knowledge gaps are for research and management decisions in Canada. We had a science advice meeting or workshop in 2019 where we presented this information as well. And so from this information and the information that we have about the potential for harmful algae, we have been able to identify key knowledge gaps and issues of concern. And so this document is in fact in review now and should be available soon to guide us in Canada for our harmful algae research and advice in the next decade. I'd like to mention that funding for this review is provided by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, the Ecosystem Stressor Program, the Strategic Program for Ecosystem Research, and Science Advice. Thank you very much for your attention.